So welcome everybody to our first AirMiners panel event of 2021. My name is Jason Grillo. I'm the event director for AirMiners. Thank you all for spending some time with us today. It feels like, we're on January 7th, but 27 days into 2021, it feels like there's been 27 weeks of activity just crammed into not even a full month yet from a variety of standpoints. So we're having this event today to better understand how carbon removal enterprises can approach US government sources of funding, knowing that there's been a lot of activity over the last few weeks in this space, particularly pertaining to the items in the recently signed COVID relief package that passed in late December. So with that, we're going to have our standard panel discussion today with some distinguished guests from both the Department of Energy and Carbon180 to help us navigate this space. And then have some Q&A at the end. We'll have a couple of announcements. Then, as we typically do, at the top of the hour at 1 p.m. Pacific, we'll stop and then have a networking session for a little bit afterwards. So I encourage you to join us. In the meantime, thank you again. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to Coulter Miller, our moderator for today. Coulter.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, everybody. My name is Coulter Miller. I am a member of the AirMiners community. In my day job, I work in the venture capital space. Today, I want to introduce the members of our panel. We'll be going through funding options, some of the information around policy. We're not going to get into speculative policy, but we'll talk about some of the things, as Jason mentioned, that are going on with the new administration and the recently signed COVID bill. First up on our panel, we have Vanessa Suarez from Carbon180.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you all. Like Coulter mentioned, my name is Vanessa Suarez. I'm a senior policy advisor with Carbon180, where I support our federal policy work across technological and land-based carbon removal solutions. And I'm really excited for the panel today.
Great. Thanks, Vanessa. Next up, we have Amishi Kumar from the DOE.
Hey, everyone. My name is Amishi. Like Coulter mentioned, I manage the carbon utilization program that's based in fossil energy. It's a sister program with carbon capture and carbon storage. So it's an applied program, which is a little bit different than what you might hear from ARPA-E. So with the applied science labs or programs, we get annual funding. So this year, we actually got $23 million to invest into the carbon tech area.
That's awesome. Thanks, Amishi. Last up, we have Scottlitzelman from ARPA-E.
Hi guys, I'm Scott. I'm from ARPA-E. I'm a program director there. ARPA-E is part of the Department of Energy. It's run differently, and I can talk a little bit about that, but it's an agency that funds early stage research. So we're looking for very high risk, but high impact technologies across a range of areas, one of which is certainly carbon removal. So I'm managing projects related to direct air capture, to point source capture. There's a program called FLEX, which is flexible carbon capture and storage, and also a program called DAYS, which is long duration energy storage. So my interest is technologies for very, very deep decarbonization. And I'm one of about 15 program directors running programs on a range of technologies, and happy to be here and talking to you about carbon removal.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Okay, so I'm really excited about this panel. I want to start off by having Vanessa speak a little bit because Carbon180 has been so important over the last 5 years in driving the conversation around carbon removal from the policy standpoint, from an education standpoint, from connecting all of us. So Vanessa, I'd love to hear a little bit about your perspective on carbon removal and funding carbon removal in our current climate.
Yeah, thank you so much, Coulter. So as folks have mentioned already today, at the end of December last year, Congress passed a massive omnibus spending package that included COVID-19 relief provisions, FY21 appropriations, the Energy Policy Act, and so much more. And so this spending package is really historic for carbon removal. We're seeing historic funding levels like we've never seen before. I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars here just for carbon removal. And this is across the Department of Energy, USDA, so many other departments. So it's kind of like this all-in effort almost for carbon removal that we're seeing in government now. I also want to touch on a really exciting establishment in the Energy Policy Act. So we're also seeing in this omnibus spending package the first ever program dedicated to RD&D of carbon removal. And so this is across land-based solutions, technological solutions. And so this is really momentous because, as I'm sure everyone on this call knows, we need multi-gigaton levels of carbon removal over the next century if we're going to meet climate goals. And that requires investment happening right now. And so this spending package is kind of bringing that vision to fruition. And so, it's really setting a precedent, I think, for what kind of, what we can expect from the administration, but also like realistically, we have money and funding opportunities right now that folks can take advantage of. And so, yeah, happy to talk more about that, go into the details of the carbon removal program, as well as what we've seen in the appropriations, which compared to previous years is also really monumental as well.
Yeah, it's absolutely a game changer. And I think something that's interesting to me is, okay, Carbon180 isn't necessarily someone who, or a group that's giving out a bunch of funding. Like you guys have the EIR program, but what part do you guys have to play in this, and how can you help founders connect with funding solutions that are out there, help all of us know how to engage with this better?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I'll touch on appropriations again. Appropriations is a yearly process that we engage with a lot at Carbon180. And I think appropriations has really direct implications for funding opportunities at the entrepreneurial level. So a couple of examples I'll give. This year in FY21 appropriations, we saw $15 million for direct air capture in the carbon capture program. And recently DOE announced a funding opportunity for that money exactly. And so, these are programs that at Carbon180 we advocate for year after year. And we're finally able to see kind of where that money is going and how it can really advance carbon removal solutions. There's another example that I can throw out there, which I'm sure Amishi will also cover. In the carbon utilization program, there were $8 million dedicated to advanced algal systems. And there was also recently a DOE funding opportunity announced for that as well. So, it's really exciting to see kind of policy advocacy finally becoming a reality. And we're able to make the connections between policy work and money going towards, these research endeavors, which is really exciting. I will also say we have been advocating for a long time for a multi-agency carbon removal RD&D program. The CREATE Act that was introduced at the end of last year, really kind of like set the stage for what we're looking for. And I think with what we saw in this omnibus spending package, this is going to really change the game, like you said, Coulter, for what we can expect for carbon removal. I mean, this program authorizes almost $500 million over the next 5 years for carbon removal. And this is for land-based technological solutions. So it's really exciting what we're seeing, and policy advocacy, I think, is playing a really big role in making sure that carbon removal can be deployed and scaled up.
Awesome. Okay, so let's seize on that. Let's go right to Amishi with Department of Energy. Amishi, you guys have this incredible mandate, honestly, as the DOE, to ensure America's security and prosperity by addressing energy and environmental issues as a result of energy. So what's going on at the DOE right now, and kind of touching on Vanessa's point there about the algae or algal systems, like what's going on there?
Yeah, props to Vanessa and Carbon180 groups, all of those NGOs, all those advocacy groups. They're absolutely crucial because, if we all went to the Hill, if every DOE scientist went to the Hill to advocate for what we believe in, we would all ask for all the money in the world. we were really blessed this year for the $23 million that were appropriated to us, and algae was explicitly called out. I think that was a really good move by Congress because they saw a good tie-in for carbon efficiencies and a lot of the work that BETO had already done, right? So BETO's already working in algae, but they've really taken a targeted approach at looking at the biomass. With this carbon utilization program, it's been broader. It's been more just about that carbon to products. So algae plays a role into it. Cement plays a role into the program, and also the electrochemical conversion, which is over half of our portfolio. So it's really great that Congress provides direction, but they also give a lot of flexibility for the scientists that are running the programs to really direct the dollars where they go. And I think one of the most important things, and why I like these conversations like this, is that getting input from where, you know, industry is, where entrepreneurs are, that can help shape where those R&D dollars go, whether it's a FOA, whether it's an SBIR topic. It's really important for people at DOE to have like a sense, like, you know, to check the pulse of what's going on and what people are really interested in and what people are investing in, especially. I think Vanessa also talked about a couple other dollar amounts. She talked about the direct air capture work, 15 million, there's like 40 million, I believe, for nets. Those dollar amounts are distributed, you know, throughout the office, throughout the agency, honestly. The carbon capture program's been around 2 decades now. It's over $100 million last decade, if I'm not wrong. So that's been a huge force. My colleague Lynn, she's the one that manages that, and she's like up to her eyeballs constantly, you know, with new ideas. And it's that across the board. You guys are right, like Advanced Manufacturing Office has a lot of money, and bioenergy technology vehicles, pretty much every office, I could go through every single one. They've all had some additional dollars directed towards this carbon tech, carbon removal. And I guess if I had to close on one thing, I would say it's a little bit more of a nuanced point. If you actually read the language of thousands of pages, I didn't, but luckily people did, and they pulled out really key tasks. The Congress did a phenomenal job by asking for coordination, task force, and what are reports? It sounds ridiculous. It sounds like it's more paper pushing, but all of these efforts for us to break our barriers and talk to different offices and engage different stakeholders, especially in industry, is also a huge benefit that came out of this latest budget.
Okay, that's such helpful perspective. And I think that's one of those things, you know, you said that the carbon capture program has been around for 20 odd years. I don't think that's something that many of us realized. So is there something in particular that's changing right now in how you guys are thinking about this or how you guys are addressing it?
Yeah, usually depending on the group, I open with what the full office name is. So it's Office of Fossil Energy, Clean Coal and Carbon Management. Sometimes when you open with that name, people are like, yo, bye. But that being said, I know we might not be like the sexiest office to be like a part of for some perspectives, but we've had a lot of money, but a lot of that money was directed towards carbon removal in a fossil energy sphere. In the last couple of years, there's been a strong pivot. We're now taking all of those lessons learned, that technological expertise, and we're shifting towards industrial sources, ambient air, so atmospheric direct air capture. We're looking at natural gas. So all of that expertise we build up with this fossil crew is now just like being unleashed on the world of possibilities, literally. So it's been a blessing to be a part of the group now.
Awesome. Okay, so that's actually a really good transition point there too, where now we can go to Scott, who's with ARPA-E, where their entire mandate is for advanced research projects, right? So Scott, what's going on over at ARPA-E, and how does this all fit into the programs and everything that you're managing and working towards?
Sure. And so ARPA-E is a little bit different in that we don't have specific budgets for areas. Like we don't have, this is our carbon removal budget, this is our point source capture or biofuels budget. It's just sort of a top line number for ARPA-E. And thanks to people like Vanessa and others, our budget has been growing over the last few years. The really big thing for people to understand is that the way programs come about at ARPA-E is they're really driven by program directors, and we're all temporary. So it's like DARPA and the Department of Defense, where a program director comes in for maybe 3 to 5 years, they try to do as much as they can, and then they have to leave. And so when programs are spun up, and I think this is relevant for your community, I think engaging with those people is really important. Now, the good news is, if you look, kind of similar to what Amishi and Vanessa were saying, a lot is happening in this space right now. And again, that's not some top-down proclaimant saying, you will do this. It's program directors saying, hey, this is really special, I'm interested. So, we have a page where we have workshops. And when we run workshops, it's a sign that a program director is interested in a topic and is looking to launch a funding opportunity announcement. One's not out yet, but they're interested. So if you go to our workshop page, the second hit is macroalgae conversion workshop. The third hit is preventing or evading methane emissions. There's one on carbon optimized bioconversion. So it's not just me, but several of my colleagues are very interested in aspects like direct air capture, direct ocean capture. And it's just, our mission is very broad. It's reduce greenhouse gas emissions, increase efficiency, reduce imports, and ensure sort of broadly US technological lead. And with a mission that broad, this space is really crucial to that. And so I think you're seeing a lot of interest among program directors, and that's, it's resulting in more programs.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the successes of DARPA, regardless of like the actual defense spending, but things that made it to market, you think about like GPS and everything like that became truly like ingrained in our way of life as civilians. I think, that's something that's really interesting about ARPA-E and the projects that you're working on, is the ability to support these research efforts long before there's market viability. But in so doing, you form a market and you form support for that market.
Yeah, and a really good example of that, and people say like, hey, you guys have been around for 10 years. We're still like a little bit like the new kid on the block. Like, what have you done? Like, where's your GPS or where's your stealth technology? And we're starting to see some examples. It takes a long time to get to market, but we're starting to see some success stories. So one example is QuantumScape, which is a solid state battery company. They started as a project in open, I think in BEAST. BEAST is a program on electric vehicles about 10 years ago. And the actual technology in that project didn't work. And they pivoted to something else in the course of the project. But in the course of pivoting, they started this new company called QuantumScape 10 years ago. And now QuantumScape is worth, don't quote me on this, but something like maybe $20 billion. Like it's this massive valuation, and it's a technology that could have real impact in the EV space. And it's one that started from an ARPA-E project that actually didn't go that well, but the team was really good and pivoted to something else. And that something else is really taking off. And so I'm hoping that this space could be the next, unicorn, hopefully comes out of this call somewhere.
Right. And that's not necessarily why we're all here, but it is important in validating what we do in the products that are being brought to market, right? And hey, like if you are part of the next unicorn, great, all the power to you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna open this up a little bit. I know one thing that's really on people's mind right now is, okay, we mentioned the policy from this last year, the administration change. We don't want to get speculative. We want to know like what's available now, what's going on, what policy is actually driving funding for potential people who are seeking funding, whether it be founders or people who are looking for research. So for all the panelists, feel free to hop in here. What does that funding landscape look like right now, given the new administration, these new policies?
Jump in and just provide like a high level and pass it on to Amishi and Scott. So in appropriations, we actually have a ton of funding for negative emissions technologies. In DOE alone, we have, I think, almost $100 million this year, which is really exciting. And a large portion of that is going to direct air capture. But it's not just about like the funding numbers either. There's a lot of program direction that supports carbon storage, DAC, algae solutions, a lot of infrastructure that we're going to need in order to scale up carbon removal, and not just the technologies themselves. And I'll even touch a little bit on the agricultural side as well. We've been seeing a ton of funding increases for really important accounts. So conservation operations, NEFA, which is where a lot of grants can, where a lot of funding can be given out through grants. And so you know, we're seeing things like extra conservation technical assistance just for soil carbon agriculture, or professional development and technical capacity development for soil carbon agriculture. And so there's like a lot of opportunity right now and kind of scaling up for money across departments and agencies. And I think it's setting like a really exciting precedent for where a lot of these opportunities can be found.
Awesome. And so what does that look like on the ground for you guys at DOE and ARPA-E? I know you both have mentioned a couple of the programs that you're working on or are gaining particular attention this year, or you're focusing on right now. But give us a little bit more a broader review, or give us some more details there.
Amishi, you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you so much, Scott. I guess I'll speak more in detail to my program. Like I said, the $8 million was explicitly written out by Congress for algal systems, so CO2 capture integrated into algae systems. That's out on the streets. Y'all can read that. The rest of the money is going to be split up, you know, in a variety of ways. I can't really say what that's going to be right now because that's pretty sure that's not allowed. But there are initiatives like multinational, international funding opportunities, right? Like accelerating CCS technologies. But I think what might be a little bit more helpful for this group, because the list would be exhaustive, right? Like every office can approach the same problem, but just with their perspective. So I approach algae, you know, with my carbon perspective. Vito approaches it with the, you know, their systems or their plant or their organism perspective, right? Someone else can approach cement as far as a building. From the buildings office, I approach it with the intent on maximizing the carbon that's in it. So I guess the best thing that I can provide to this group is, as boring as it may seem, but kind of read the appropriation language, go to the office websites, see what their perspective is, and try to tap in. Go see if you can get to workshops that are public. There are reports that people put out on what their perspective is and what problems they want to address. And I guess one of the biggest things that I don't see enough engagement in is RFIs. RFIs are requests for information. So that's DOE literally saying we have an open ear. That they're showing interest and they're trying to garner responses from people that are out there actually doing the work. And sometimes we list a very broad RFI, you know, on industrial decarbonization, and you can sometimes get as few as like a dozen responses. And that's what baffles me, is because I know there's more people working in the space, but oftentimes in the venues we establish to get information, it seems like that information doesn't come flooding in like I know it's out there and as much as I want it to. So that's my one point, because everyone's approaching all these problems in such a variety of ways, and it's super cool, but I just couldn't go into every detail. Scott, do you want to take it over?
Sure. And I guess, you know, for people in the AirMiner community who are interested in the potential for funding from ARPA-E, they're in the near term, there are basically two really big points that I want to convey. Point number one is, historically, ARPA-E has run an open funding opportunity announcement, or FOA, every 3 years. And it's just, you know, send us your best energy ideas, just, you know, as much as you can, the very best. And we just get, you know, bombarded with applications. There is no FOA at this time. We have said that we intend to issue Open 2021. And there's actually an Open 2021 website, and you know, Jason, Coulter, and Tito can post that link to you guys later, saying that the intention is to drop it in January. I don't know when it's going to come out, but potentially very soon. So there could be an open funding opportunity announcement for ARPA-E like any day now. And they're, you know, every 3 years, and it's any scope. Now, again, it's a lot of applications. Most of our programs are done via focus programs. So you can tell it's a focus program if it has like a cutesy acronym that people spent way too much time thinking about. So like DAYS and FLEX and, you know, all those different things. The number one thing for people to be aware of is it's really important to engage with program directors in the program development process. So like I mentioned that there's an ARPA-E workshop page, like, you know, either participating in a workshop that's going to happen or looking at a workshop that happened recently. Like there's a recent workshop on methane emissions. That's really important because as long as there's no FOA out, we can talk to you. So if you say like, hey, I'm interested in this, what do you think about this? Or do you know, how are you thinking about that? Like, we can have that kind of engagement. Once a FOA is released, we can't talk to you. We go into like what's called, at least we call it quiet period. And so if you send me an email saying like, hey, Scott, this FOA is out, like, what do you think about this? I'm not gonna respond because I can't. And so it's really important to not just sit around and wait and hope that, you know, a FOA is released that's relevant to what you're doing, but to engage with people and say like, hey, I think, you know, ARPA-E should be working on this, or I think you should be looking at that, or not this. And that kind of engagement really helps us to sharpen our ideas and make sure we're running useful programs. So I think those 2 points, you know, an open's coming, and, you know, when it comes to more focused programs, engaging with people are really, I think, the main points from ARPA-E's point of view.
Yeah, okay, and that's a really important perspective, because I think that helps guide a lot of people who are new to this and who are trying to understand the space to get some understanding of, okay, can I contact people? How do I contact them? When do I contact them? So really appreciate that perspective, Scott. So I think something that's important to me, as considering my background in venture capital, is that when founders are seeking capital, they need to be mindful of how that is impacting their cap table and influencing whether or not they're going to be able to get additional capital down the line, if they price themselves out early, or if they dilute their cap table to the extent where they don't have any real stake in their own company anymore, or anything like that. So I want to make sure we talk about when we're talking about funding from DOE or ARPA-E, is that dilutive or is that non-dilutive? What does that look like when people are taking money for the projects that they're proposing?
So for ARPA-E, I mean, our funding is non-dilutive, so we take no equity. So most of the time, the financial instrument we have is called a cooperative agreement. So it's kind of like a grant, except it has quote unquote substantial involvement with the government. That's sort of a polite way of saying like, we're really active in project management and we're gonna be like talking to you like when we set milestones, like we mean them and we wanna see what you're up to. But it's more like a grant. So we interact with people, but we don't take equity. The one thing I will say is that we do have IP terms, and we have like on our website, I think we've got like sort of standard IP terms around things like US manufacturing and other things that are sort of important to the government from a policy point of view, but we do not take equity.
Awesome. Okay, and Amishi, is that the same thing that goes on with DOE?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you said those terms, I didn't know what those meant, because I've been so entrapped in this world where it's like, we are taxpayer dollars, right? Like, we are just doing this for the greater good of the community. At the end of the day, if something succeeds, I'm not going to get a kickback at all, right? Like, we just want what's best for you all. So, yeah, we have no equity in anything except for success for everybody.
Great. Okay. Well, that's super important. We really appreciate that perspective. So now, you know, you mentioned RFIs. That's awesome. We actually had a question that came in before the event where people were asking, hey, how do I find more of these RFPs? Like, where do I look? Who do I have conversations with? So both you and Scott have kind of touched on this. Vanessa, do you guys have any sort of resources at Carbon180 that can help people figure out where they need to be going, or the conversations that they need to be having in order to find this information?
Yeah, great question. So we're actually currently scoping out developing kind of a federal funding tracker, essentially, to tie where all of these dollar amounts that, you know, I've been throwing out, and like when we go through all these bill texts and report languages and are able to identify these number values, we want to like create a tracker to be able to link these values to these types of resources, so that folks like everyone here today will be able to just go on our website and find, oh, here's the number, and then here's the opportunity right there. So it's still in development, but hopefully before the end of this year, we'll have something to share with you all.
Okay. Well, then to all three of you, do you guys have a recommendation for the people who might be viewing this event on where they should start? Like, does that start with conversations? Does it start with knowing the right websites and web pages to go to? Does it start with following the right social media accounts? You know, follow AirMiners. What is helpful for people who are considering this? And then I guess the next piece beyond finding the RFPs is like, what sort of considerations are being evaluated as people are making these RFPs or submitting them?
So for us, for ARPA-E, one thing I guess I'd recommend to everyone is that you sign up for our newsletter. I mean, shameless plug, right? But it says like, here's new programs, or here's a new workshop, or here's a new program director. We just hired this person who's interested in topic X, and their whole job is to come up with programs. So that's a good way of figuring it out. Reaching out to people. I mean, reach out to somebody like me. And I might say, hey, that sounds really cool. I don't know anything about it. It's not my area, but you should talk to my colleague so-and-so. Those are ways that can happen. And again, look at, it's a little bit more specific, but if you look at our workshop website, if you look at workshops that happened recently that have not been FOAs yet, it's not to say a workshop always becomes a FOA, but usually it does. And that might give you a sense of what's coming. So between our website and talking to people, you should have a pretty good sense as to where the different program directors are in sort of the process of spinning up new programs.
Okay, that's super helpful. I think a piece of this, and Amishi, unless you want to jump in here too, but I think another piece of this that people are curious about are tips, honestly, for like surviving the grant writing process or the granting process. Because I think it's one of those things where you're sending out so many applications, or you're trying to find the right one, and it can like wear you down. So part of that is people managing their own timelines, but also part of it is managing expectations around how do I do this? What do I do? What do I need to have out there? And then the timeline is sort of like, by setting those expectations, I think the ambiguity can be draining. So if people have a better understanding of what sort of timelines they're operating on, I think that helps people feel more secure in how they're moving through the process. So what does that look like? What advice do you have for people?
I guess from my end is that keep in mind, like, all of the comments of government being bureaucratic and being slow are true. I can think of a conversation that led to, a funding proposal, but it was over the course of 2 years, right? Like, that's how long some timelines can be to get money out the door. So that burnout, as long as you manage your expectations, right? Like, you will have to apply to many. You will probably have to, continuously do this, but, don't expect the payout to be right away. And I think starting off small is also a benefit. The SBIR program is a really great program to get your foot in the door with understanding how government funding works, because otherwise it's a heavy lift to do these really labor intensive contracts to always, get a no at the end. So sometimes targeting the smaller dollar amounts is a good way, to get awareness of a program, get some like face time in front of the people that will be evaluating future applications. So I really do want to emphasize that, and also working alongside national labs. That's something, sorry, what's the name of the small amount program? SBIR, Small Business Investment, or I can't remember what the IR stands for, to be honest, SBIRs. But also working with the national labs. That's the point I wanted to make. National labs have a lot of face time with DOE. So getting connected with a PI that is working in your space, seeing how you can collaborate with their projects sometimes is a really good idea. And I've seen some successes come out of our programs that way as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point about building momentum with small victories too. Like, you don't have to go for the home run shot on like, okay, we're going to get a $10 million grant, like work your way up, validate your product, validate your research, validate what you're doing with small victories, and build momentum around it. So that's a great point there. Scott, Vanessa, do you guys have anything you want to jump in on there?
Yeah, so at least when we release our FOAs, we say what the evaluation criteria are. So we say these are the, innovation, impact, and scientific merit. That's all in there, and that's the way we assess it. But again, the really important thing is, if possible, try to engage with people. So you mentioned, keep writing a lot of proposals and not having a very big hit rate. If it's still a stage where FOA hasn't been released, being able to attend a workshop or talk to a program director, we want people to have as clear, to be as clear as possible as to what we're interested in, what we're looking for, how we're thinking about that. Sometimes it comes across clearly, sometimes it doesn't. There have been times where like I've said things and I thought like I'm being crystal clear, and people come back to me and they say, I have no idea what you're talking about, Scott. And that's really helpful. It tells me that I need to be more clear or describe it a little bit differently. So I think, by speaking to somebody rather than just, reading funding opportunity announcement with somebody that you've never heard of before, probably helps you understand better sort of what their interests are.
Okay, so when we're talking about the funding landscape and the policy that, you know, our government institutions are helping to shape as we think about addressing carbon removal or, you know, greenhouse gas mitigation, do we have an idea of how our policy and the way we're approaching it as a country relates to, say, the EU or nations in the APAC region or anything like that? Do we have an idea of our approach versus what else is out there? And maybe let me start off with Vanessa on this one, actually.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thanks, Coulter. So I will say, you know, the US has been, I think, a leader on carbon capture technologies. And I think that will also translate to carbon removal and kind of what we're seeing at the international level. Not to be speculative, because I know that's what we don't want to cover, but, you know, I think with the Biden administration and the incoming Congress and a lot of what we're seeing, I think, you know, the US is going to continue leading on a lot of these policies that we have in place. And what's really great about carbon removal is that it's had bipartisan support, you know, since the beginning. So even during the Trump administration, we were able to see a lot of really historic, you know, funding levels achieved or new programs created. And so I think it's like just a really great history for us to reflect on, and it can mean a lot for what our future is going to look like. And I think, you know, the US can continue leading in a lot of these technologies and solutions.
Okay. Sure. And any perspective from DOE or ARPA-E on that?
I mean, we certainly talk to, you know, people in, you know, sort of our cousins and, you know, other agencies, but generally speaking, you know, our focus is really early stage technology. And so we might use that as a way of trying to understand what other people are doing or what we should be working on. But, you know, a little bit more on the policy side of things is not really at least how ARPA operates. It's really more early stage tech focus.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you guys took any of your cues from, you know, funding successes in partner or sister programs in other countries, or.
Oh yeah, we definitely do. Like so actually, you know, one of the other programs I'm running, Flex, the Flexible Carbon Capture and Storage Program, a lot of the early research on that idea came out of the UK. And so when I was doing research as to should this be an ARPA program, you know, I was speaking to those people to look, you know, to see what they had done and what they thought, and then sort of spun that into its own thing. But no, absolutely, we look, you know, for good ideas everywhere.
Okay. Yeah, and I know one thing that people. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think the applied sciences, since they're usually around for, you know, tens of years sometimes, they work really hard to get multilateral, bilateral engagement. So we work with UNECE, Clean Energy Ministerial, CSLF. So back to Vanessa's point, I think for the utilization program and a lot of the stack work, I think will follow the footsteps that the conventional carbon capture and storage relationships have already established. So I think there's a benefit for that, but I do think it's important for us to pivot into these new areas and these new spaces that aren't so CCS dominated, but are, you know, building off negative carbon emissions and explicitly just DAC.
Okay, and I think, you know, another question that came in earlier is, you know, how does the funding landscape look right now for abatement versus actual removal? And so what I hear you saying, Amishi, is considering the different ways that we can be addressing carbon removal, but is abatement also part of what you guys are trying to do and making sure that, you know, new emissions are not released? Like, is that part of what you're funding as well, or not as much?
I would say yes, especially in the youth program, right? Like with direct air capture tied in with youth, you're pretty much harvesting your carbon source from the air. So in that context, yes. I think, yeah, that's where I'll leave it.
Okay. Vanessa, throwing it back to you, do you have an awareness on, you know, what sort of, where that line is getting drawn in terms of how much funding or support is going for abatement versus removal?
Yeah, so I think even in the omnibus spending package, we're seeing, funding for removal, even in places that are focused on abatement. So, there's within the omnibus spending package, Title IV focuses on carbon management. And so I think a lot of these technologies are really more about, greenhouse gas abatement, but there are still provisions for direct air capture research and carbon utilization with like negative emissions overall. And so I think there's a lot of conflation within these technologies. And I think that also happens, that gets translated to policy as well. And so we can see negative emissions technologies or carbon removal funding and policy provisions within things that are also maybe focused just on greenhouse gas abatement. And, I think that does provide promise because like I've said, a few times already, we need kind of all hands on deck from the federal government to, continue promoting carbon removal solutions. And for technological and land-based solutions, there can be a lot of, or sometimes it can be difficult to figure out where to draw that line, but it's important to promote both.
Sure. Well, I think many of us have an awareness that carbon isn't the only issue, right? It's not just carbon dioxide that we're trying to address. There's awareness that methane has a much higher potency in terms of greenhouse gas. So is there anything out there right now that's trying to address other greenhouse gases or specifically methane?
So definitely yes. In fact, my colleague, Jack Leonard, there's no FOE at this time, but he had a workshop, and I think he even has an acronym. He's calling it Remedy, sort of an idea. That's essentially, I don't know the exact scope, but he's interested in mitigating methane emissions. And exactly what that looks like, I don't know. Again, on our workshops webpage, there's a link, and there's a video of Jack talking about his idea. There's a bunch of presentations people give. Like this is openly available. So if you're interested, I encourage you to check it out. I saw one of the questions earlier is like, how do we find out sort of what programs are out there? I think we have a page that sort of lists like search programs and lists like which program director is aligned with a given topic. But again, if you just like reach out to anyone at RB, like sort of the general address or somebody's email, we can try to point you in the right direction. But for methane, look at my colleague, Jack Leonard.
Okay, awesome. I really appreciate that. So I think one thing too that I have been thankful to see more of this in the carbon removal space as a whole is an awareness that carbon removal, climate change action needs to be considerative of environmental justice. And so I know, Vanessa, you have a background where you're also very mindful of environmental justice. So what does that look like, and how does that tie into this overall process? And as we think about funding for founders or funding for people who are working in this space, where's the intersection there?
Yeah, thanks, Coulter. So environmental justice is something that we've been thinking a lot about at Carbon180. And last year, we actually launched an environmental justice initiative where we've been trying to think about, how does equity play into carbon removal? And, we're at a space right now where carbon removal is moving from being really nascent to kind of like entering a lot of really larger climate platforms. And so making sure that we scale up carbon removal equitably and rightfully so is really important. When we look at, I'll say, our appropriations process again, I will say equity is not always really integrated into a lot of the report language that we're seeing and like direction that's being provided with the funding levels that are given to DOE and USDA. And so one thing that we're thinking a lot about at Carbon180 is how to approach our requests so that, when we are, advocating for more funding to go to carbon removal, that it's going to make an impact as well for frontline communities and making sure that the carbon removal solutions are, a lot of like key social knowledge gaps, for example, can be filled when it comes to, what are the risks when it comes to geologic carbon storage, or what are the risks with some of these more novel direct air capture technologies. And so I think when we're, approaching our funding and approaching the direction that we apply to these funding numbers, it's really important to also, be really mindful about what we're going to do with that money and making sure that, we're yeah, that it's going to the right places and it's going to the right research, and that when we take this research to the deployment and the commercialization levels, that we're really being cognizant of the communities that these projects could be deployed in, and really making sure that we're incorporating all different types of perspectives and backgrounds from the very beginning.
Okay. And does environmental justice play into the decision making, or how you guys are framing your thinking at DOE or ARPA-E? I know ARPA-E obviously being more deep tech focused, but I wasn't sure if you're considering that in your founder, like how your founder selection or anything like that. So Amishi and Scott, do you guys have any additional perspective on that?
It's not, so I mean, I definitely hear what you're saying. It's not explicitly a criteria. Again, the criteria tend to be things like impact. Now, impact can be pretty broadly defined, and scientific merit and the qualifications of the team. A lot of factors go into a program director spinning up and envisioning a program. And so I understand where the question's coming from, but usually, for us, it's more of a, emissions and what does it mean for the U.S. economy and things like that. But what leads to a program is pretty complex, so there could be a lot buried in there.
Okay.
Similar to Scott, there's no defined criteria when we make selections, but I do feel comfortable saying with this and the change in administration, we have this topic has been explicitly brought up. So I do think under this administration there'll be more attention devoted to how we incorporate environmental justice into our programs themselves. I think there was the first time I really came across it in terms of CCS or energy justice was a chapter of a book by Ava Azad, and she talked about the importance of I'm going to paraphrase it terribly, but it got me thinking, and it did provide a unique perspective that I didn't look at CCS before, where the onus is on and the burden is on developed countries to do their part to decarbonize, especially with DAC solutions and negative energy technology. So I think that's also a perspective to have beyond, fence line communities. It's this broader, pressure on us to do our part.
Part of this movement too, as we consider more environmental justice, is thinking about community-based solutions. And one of the things that I've heard discussed a lot is regenerative agricultural practices and how they impact specific communities. So do we know of any, specific call outs for agricultural practices or permaculture or anything like that for funding in what you guys are working on right now?
I currently don't have any opportunities offhand, but I would definitely suggest looking into anything that comes out of NIFA, National Institute of Food and Agriculture. There are a lot of grants that come out of that program, and I think they've been shifting a lot towards regenerative agriculture practices. And this is something we're seeing across the USDA. Like I mentioned before, soil carbon basically came up like all over the place. So many programs across the USDA now have like specific call outs for soil carbon and regenerative agriculture. So I think it's really safe to assume that there are going to be a lot of funding opportunities coming out of this omnibus spending package. And yeah, I think, like you mentioned, Coulter, regenerative agriculture is really important for environmental justice, and it can have really tangible community benefits as well. And this is something that we've been thinking a lot about at Carbon180 too.
Yeah, and ARPA-E, I mean, again, our open solicitation could be anything. We have a list of webinars on our Open21 website of things that are not saying that these are the only topics we're interested in, but these are examples of one that we're definitely interested in. And my colleague, David Babson, has a seminar on carbon farming. It's definitely something near and dear to his heart. So, that's his way of saying like, hey, this is a topic I'm interested in. If an open solicitation should arise and you're interested in this, by all means, submit an application.
Okay, so another thing that I think ties into that as well is, we heard both Vanessa and Amishi talk about soil carbon. So I think something that's really important for us to be measuring our impact and knowing how well we're performing at funding companies that are addressing these things is understanding verification, monitoring, systems that are going to help us understand the extent to which these programs that we're working on are having tangible effects and scaling those across the world. So like what sort of funding is out there right now for verification, monitoring, you know, stuff like that?
I want to chime in first because this is something that this carbon truth, you know, concept is something we are so heavily devoted towards. I wanted to bring it up before when we were talking about abatement, right? Like, how do you define it? What are you measuring? That's such a core principle of every single type of technology that we're talking about. Shameless plug, there is an NETL CO2 utilization LCA toolkit. It's got a pretty big name, but it is our perspective on how you measure your carbon truth, how, you know, you draw your system boundaries. So I think that is the number one place people should start, is understanding what you are deploying and if it is actually making a net, you know, negative impact or making a truly measurable, quantifiable offset from, you know, business as usual. And that's where I think really getting a handle on your number and understanding all the, you know, back end pieces of your technology where you can decarbonize either your energy or your byproducts or your reactants, all of that plays such a big role in like the technologies we invest in. So we fund right now mostly with our national labs to get those toolkits up, but there's a lot of coordination and efforts going on at DOE, and I highly suggest looking at the NETL tool because it was a big thing for our program to make sure it was open source. And there's webinars and there's a hotline. We just want people to get more comfortable with doing, you know, a tried and true life cycle analysis, just, you know, for the greater good to make sure what you're doing is actually worth it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that has to be the basis of any major action, right? It's like we have to have a common understanding and a definitive baseline on what we're doing. And I think, you know, when thinking back to the Carbis, it was interesting seeing how many people called out Carbon X Prize. I think it was Mike Leach at Carbon X Prize for helping to set a standard for carbon measurement and metrics so that Carbon X Prize could better evaluate the programs that they were working with. So little shout out there too. How about Scott? Do you guys have any specific focus on measurement and, you know, monitoring, anything like that, verification systems?
Yeah, I mean, we've had programs that looked at that. So we had a program called Monitor that was specifically looking at methane, how to find methane leaks like very cheaply and very effectively. So that was trying to develop new technologies that, you know, important for that. We have a program called Roots, which is focusing on, I'm trying to remember exactly what it is, but essentially, you know, partly is characterization, like how do you measure like root structures to better understand sort of how those structures can remove carbon and measure that. So again, our focus is always going to be sort of on technology gaps. And so if it's, and I think everything Amishi said, I think it's awesome. It makes total sense. I think we would say, you know, if there are other ideas out there for how to measure cheaper, faster, better, if there are new ideas about that, those are definitely things that we would be interested in.
Okay, great. So look, we're coming down to towards the end of this. I've been trying to keep an eye on the chat to get questions in here. I've tried to work those in here at the end of the conversation. As we kind of wrap up here, I'd like to give each of the panelists just, you know, a minute or so to any sort of reflections for this upcoming year and things that you feel people should be thinking about when they're thinking about funding or being part of this carbon removal community, whatever it might be. I would love to hear you guys' thoughts, kind of give us something to focus on as we head out for the rest of the day. So Scott, you're up on my screen. Would you mind starting us off? Sorry to put you on the hot seat.
That's okay. No, I mean, this is awesome. And I think in general, I really appreciate you connecting me with the community because, you know, our job is doing things like this and trying to talk about what we do so people understand it, but also to say, we are not the be all and end all of ideas. Like we are looking to the community for the types of things we should be doing. And again, I keep going back to how important it is to engage with people. Like if you have an area, please reach out to somebody at ARPA-E. And if you don't know who it is, like email me and I can try to connect you because our job is to find these ideas. It's helpful to understand a little bit better and how you're thinking about it. But I think it's the main point is just, you know, it's not just you looking for funding, it's us trying to understand like what should we, you know, ARPA-E and the government be doing to advance our mission.
Okay, thank you. Amishi, I see you next.
Okay, I was just going to say ditto to Scott. He said it perfectly. Truly, it's a blessing to be here and to talk to you guys, because it's sometimes so hard to break out of that little office that we're in, chugging away, doing paperwork, photos, things like that. So engaging is so important. I know managing expectations, sometimes it takes a while for you to find the right person to talk to, but don't give up. Keep, sending us that one pager, that brief slide deck, work on the pitch. Wherever you get, just try to engage. Our job is to listen, quite frankly. So we appreciate all of the inputs that you give. And thank you, AirMiners, also. You guys have done a really good job. This community is vibrant and fun, and I really enjoyed this. It was very different than my other calls today, so I appreciate you guys putting this together.
Oh, well, thanks. We're so happy to have you. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. And that reminder that, let's not get stuck in our offices. That's part of the beauty of AirMiners. It's let's connect, because there are other people out there who really, really care about this. So Vanessa, why don't you wrap us up, and then we can head on to our next bit.
Thanks, Coulter. And, I just want to echo Scott and Amishi, thank you so much, everyone, for all of the insights that I've also gained just being on this panel. Coming from the policy side, it's really important for us to know what to advocate for when we're approaching all of these different policy levers like omnibus bills and appropriations. And so, getting insights from you all on what is most helpful to help you all, figure out where these opportunities are or what you want to see come out of policy and out of the government is super helpful for us at Carbon180. So, please also reach out if there are ways that we can engage or help in this effort as well. And shout out to the AirMiners community. It's really amazing to see so many folks so passionate about carbon removal. And it's thanks to everyone here that we're able to see what's coming out of the Biden administration. And I think we have a really exciting year ahead of us.
Great. Well, thank you so much to our three panelists. It's been an honor being a moderator for this event, and, three really bright, engaged, wonderful people. So thank you so much for giving your time to us. I want to, again, say thank you to the AirMiners community. It's so important that we have this group of people who care about something as much as we do, and that we can be reminded that we're not alone in our passion for doing something that impacts future generations and leaves the world better than we found it, right? So if you are not part of the AirMiners Slack, we would love to have you on there. We have channels within that for general where we all get together, but broken out for soil carbon, for blue carbon, for all these different opportunities where you can get involved, technology, business models, come be a part, have those conversations. Let us get out of our offices and, honestly share the stoke about carbon removal. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason so that he can wind us down and set us up for networking.
All right. Thanks, Coulter. And especially thank you to Amishi, Scott, Vanessa for fantastic, for your support in this. And thank you to you as an audience. We really couldn't be here without any of you. And it's been a pleasure to just be part of this. To Coulter's point, yes, we're going to have networking initiating in a minute or two here, but a couple of announcements. One, our next booklet on the CDR primer is happening this upcoming at noon Pacific, delving into chapter 2 about different kinds of carbon removal approaches. So please sign up for that. At our next opportunity, we will have a link to that in the chat right now. Thank you, Tito. And also for the future, our next panel event like this is going to happen on Wednesday, February 10th. We're going to be talking about entrepreneurship in ocean CDR. So featuring entrepreneurs who are in the mix of doing carbon dioxide removal projects focused on ocean based carbon removal approaches. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording and thank you once again for a lovely event and have a great day. See you next time.